Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Friday's Huessy seminar. We offer 2 to 3 of these seminars every other Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. And this is our last seminar for 2024, and we already have a bunch arranged for you for 2025. On January 10 at 10 a.m., we have the case for Homeland Missile Defense with Robert Sufer and Mark Massa. January 31st, 10 a.m., we have the Middle East update and the Iranian nuclear threat with Shoshana Bryan and Elon Berman. On Valentine's Day, February 14, we have Russian intentions with its growing nuclear forces with Stephen Blank and Mark Schneider. On February 28, we will have an assessment and update of the Posture Commission with Madeline Creedon and Frank Miller. And then on March 14, we have the Chinese nuclear threat and implications for U.S. security with Rick Fisher and Gordon Chang. Yesterday, we had our very first inaugural Real Space Strategy live seminar with Chris Stone, and those will be Thursdays at 2 p.m. My name is Alex Littlefield, and I'm a chief of staff here at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, or NIDS. NIDS is a 501c3 think tank, and our motto is Think Deterrence. We live our motto of Think Deterrence through education, research, and consulting. To get to know us better, you may listen to our podcast, The NIDS View and NIDS Knowledge. Check out our courses at the NIDS Academy, read our articles at Global Security Review, and follow upcoming events such as this one at thinkdeterrence.com. This event allows for you to communicate directly to the speaker. During Q&A, you can put your questions in the chat box or raise your hand with the emoji, and we'll give you the mic and the camera so you can be seen on the video along with the rest of us here. We're very proud to have Senior Fellow Peter Huessy as a key part of our organization. He's been hosting these seminars for over 40 years, and he brings a wealth of connection, knowledge, and insight to our organization. And it's my honor to hand the mic over to you, Peter, who's going to introduce our special guests here.
Thank you very much, Alex, and welcome, Chris. It's always an honor to hear from you. I would like to say a few remarks. When Admiral Richard came before the Senate Armed Services Committee a number of years ago as commander of STRATCOM, he said that the Chinese were going through what he called a breathtaking increase in their nuclear weapons, for which he was roundly criticized, particularly by the arms control or disarmament community, who said that the missile silos weren't silos, they were windmills. The thing about windmills is you don't put the tube in the ground, you put it above ground. But the question in my mind was not so much are the Chinese building more nuclear weapons, which they are, what are they going to do with them? And that was what the Posture Commission back in October of 2023 laid out, is they thought that both Russia and China were in the business of using nuclear weapons for coercion and blackmail. And the question is, what should the U.S. do? And part of why I've asked Chris to come here is to lay out what it is the Chinese are doing so we can have a clear view of that. And then the question is, should the United States build more nuclear weapons, keep the number we have? And here I just want to say a few words about proposals made by the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Federation of American Scientists, the Arms Control Association, and Plowshares, all of which have said, kill the ICBM leg of the triad. Well, what's fascinating to me is what would be the implications of the U.S. if we did that? Number one, we would lose not only the 400 Sentinel warheads that are going to be deployed, but their ability to upload to 2. I'm using 2, not 3. I'm going to be minimizing it. Well, that's 800 warheads we can't use as a hedge. And when you do that and say, well, we just put them on submarines, we'd have to build, and I just did the numbers in an article that's coming out soon, is we'd have to build 9 more submarines because 98% of those ICBM warheads are on alert. And submarines, pick the number you want, but roughly 50% on alert. So we would end up, if we got rid of the ICBMs, in 2050, we would be able to build the 400 plus warheads we've lost through Sentinel and the 400 we could build up. So our hedge would be a grand total of 400 warheads over about 1550 by 2050. And as Chris will tell us, what the Chinese, and he's also written about what the Russians would have by 2035, not 2050. So we would be 15 years late, and I'm not sure 400 warheads, in addition to what we have today, is going to be what Stratcom says we need for deterrence. And I think that's very, very important because, as Admiral Richard has said, every time he went to look at what the Chinese are doing, he had to double the previous estimates that the intelligence community had given him. And he did that. He said that happened every time I went to them and said, what are they doing? Whatever they had told me previously, they doubled. And so it is an honor to have Chris come and talk to us today. He has been a speaker at my Louisiana State University system triad convention, and I hope he'll join us again in this June 24th, which is when our next triad event is scheduled. I hope to, in 2026, go back to Kings Bay, Georgia, and have a sea-based, sub-Navy centric, but we always have our ICBM friends come down to Kings Bay in Georgia to talk about it, because I do need to go there. But again, I want to thank my friend Alex, who's our chief of staff, and our president, Jim Petrosky, for helping us put all this together. And Chris, over to your dear friend. Thank you for coming and joining us, and take it away.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for that kind introduction. Always a pleasure to be here among friends at NIDS. Thanks, Peter, for asking. I think this is a very important topic, very timely topic. It's kind of cliche to say, hey, this is we're at an inflection point, but we really are living through an inflection period at this point. I think that'll become clear as I go through some of these slides that I have. I did want to also thank all of my colleagues who've done some great work in this area. There's a host of them, just some that I think you probably all know: Rick Fisher, Mark Schneider, Decker Eveleth, Jim Howe, and my own colleagues from long time, Dave Rabine, John Swigel, have helped me on a lot of these issues as well. So sometimes Google Earth is helpful. Sometimes it's not as helpful. So I'm gonna try sharing some slides here. I will get that going. Let me know if you can see this. Looks like it's live. Okay. So today we're going to look at Chinese nuclear forces. It is, as Peter said, only half of our issue, because the other half is the big bear of Russia. Both are undergoing some substantial changes in their nuclear forces, some changes in their nuclear doctrine. I don't think anything should be particularly shocking in that regard, but we can go wherever Q&A folks want to go. So let me set the political context. Not going to spend much time on this slide. Most of you have seen it before. It's a tripolar relation slide. So there are three dyadic relationships that this tries to plot: the U.S.-China relationship on the vertical axis from antagonistic to partner, the U.S.-Russia relationship from antagonistic to partner on the horizontal axis, and the color of the dot is the Russia-China relationship from, again, antagonistic to essentially allied. They were allies at one time. And this path is very squiggly. The spaghetti path goes from 45 to today. And I wouldn't get caught up on the details. But what I would say, because if we all took a shot at plotting this spaghetti path, it would all look slightly different. However, I think we would all find that there are largely 5 eras of this tripolar relationship. And I just kind of highlighted them there in the circles. The one that we are in right now is particularly dangerous because, of course, if you're in the lower left corner, if we're in the lower left corner, that means we have a bad relationship with both Russia and China. If the dot is red, that also means they have a good relationship with each other. So those are the places we have to look at most closely. Deterrence is the most challenging in this lower left corner of the graphic, and you can see that there are 3 eras there, but those first 2 eras, China essentially could not deliver nuclear weapons to the US. So for all intents and purposes, it was bipolar from a nuclear perspective, tripolar from a broader geopolitical perspective. Now, however, in this final, this 5th era, who knows, there might be a 6th. I'm hopeful that there'll be something better than the 5th. But in this 5th era, you'll see as we go through the slides that we're in a tripolar relationship with nuclear peers now. China can deliver nuclear weapons to the United States. Its capacity and capabilities to do so are increasing daily, as is Russia's. So that's where we find ourselves from a big picture perspective. Let's jump right into what most people think of when they think, okay, so what does the China nuclear weapons program look like? Well, let's look at the force structure. So numbers of operationally deployed strategic nuclear weapons. That's where most folks start. Sometimes that's where they end, unfortunately. And this is just one estimate. Happens to be my estimate of Chinese strategic forces. I use a whole slew of different open source, multiple sources. I use Google. I use all sorts of stuff. So it's all unclassified, and some reasonable assumptions. They don't necessarily reflect the views of NSRI, the University of Nebraska, or any federal entity. Get that disclaimer right out of the way. So right off the bat, you could see that the DF5, their large silo-based force stemming from the early 80s is relatively small. There's what you can see here is a yield scale of very high yield, megatons, down to ultra low yield, which is tens of tons. And you have hundreds of tons, kilotons, tens of kilotons, hundreds of kilotons, and megatons. And that's just kind of set your mind on the yields of these various warheads. Above the circles, you see the name of the system and whether it's silo or mobile based, the number of those launchers, the number of warheads per launcher. And you see in red inside the circle the total number of warheads deliverable by that system. And these can all range the United States. So when you add everything up, my number comes to 578, largely based on 2 principal legs. One is those silo fields that we've seen built out essentially completely at this point in three large fields in China over the last few years. Those are probably half to 2/3 full, so I list it that way. The 31A is in many of them. The 41, which has really just come into production in the last 5 years or so, is in fewer of those. All of those are single hitters again. So this is there's no source that says these silo-based missiles have a single warhead on there. However, since, as you'll see, China is somewhat limited in the amount of fissile material it has, and in the pace that it can produce warheads, I think it's a reasonable assumption to say, look, they're going to fill out all those fields. Once they fill them all out with single hitters, then they'll sweep back through and maybe put in triplets, etc. That seems to be a fairly reasonable assumption. And then, of course, there's the mobile ICBMs and the JL3s that are on the SSBNs. All of those add up to 578. When you compare that number to the US number, and again, these are rough numbers. They are from various sources, including Federation of American Scientists, et cetera. You look at all of that. You look at the New START declarations, which pretty much gives you these numbers. We're very open about our numbers. You come up to 1950. So 1950 looks pretty favorable when you compare it to 578, particularly since our weapons are highly reliable. And for example, our stealth bomber is going to penetrate, et cetera. So that looks pretty healthy. If you only had China to worry about, and if you only had China's intercontinental forces to worry about. I will remind us that where we were at the beginning of the 2018 NPR process was here. So you can see the huge difference. 126 back then, again by my count, 578 now. So it's almost a fivefold improvement in numbers in just a few years, maybe 7 years. So when Admiral Richards says it's breathtaking, I would have to agree. A fivefold increase in just 7 years is pretty breathtaking. And at that pace, you might expect another multiple fold increase in the next 10 years. And in fact, that is where we get to. So here's our 2025 net assessment, and here's our 2035 net assessment. This shift continues. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we're in this inflection phase where China is rapidly building out a peer force. And actually, it will be superior in numbers to the United States. Not going to say that the H-20 stealth bomber is going to penetrate U.S. airspace. That remains to be seen, how good their stealth bomber is going to be. But they will put up large numbers. So in 2035, you have 2184, and that's without counting the stealth bombers. The stealth bombers are counted on a separate slide, and they'll add to the theater force. But the largest portion here, you expect kind of small growth in the DF-5 force, some growth in the DF-41s, particularly the 41s, where the 41's going to, for the most part, replace the 31As and 31AGs, et cetera, on a sort of decadal timescale. They'll go largely to a mobile 41 force with a silo-based 41 force. They will have more warheads. So the mobile have 3, the silos still at 1. The JL3s will be fitted out. Now they'll have 6096 subs, as well as their 6094As and their 2094s, all outfitted with JL3s of one MERV version or another. And sort of the big hitter here is the DF-45, sometimes called the DF-51. We've seen this in various social media posts and press posts going back probably 20 years. It's now clear that they're working on one, and it is essentially an MX peacekeeper type of missile. So a mobile MX in this case. Mobile, highly MERV, 10 warheads per missile. 100 of those gets you 1,000 warheads, and essentially that's what the United States had at one time. So that's where we are on 2035 parity path in so-called strategic forces. It's important to note that when we say strategic, that's just really a definitional thing, and it comes from treaties. We are treaty constrained until February of 2026. The Chinese are not treaty constrained, have never been treaty constrained. They've been economically constrained. They've been geopolitically constrained. They've had higher priorities to spend their money on, for sure. But they are not constrained from a treaty perspective, from a legal perspective. So that's where we are from a strategic forces perspective. Rough strategic parity. So I think Peter mentioned these missile silo fields. They're out there. They can now be seen on Google for quite a while. You could not find these on Google. The images were blurred deliberately, I guess. So here's your rough strategic parity. They are filling these fields out. There are 3 large fields, about 340 missile silos or so, and we expect a large growth in intercontinentally deliverable warheads from those missile fields. And those kind of missile fields are certainly indicative of a peer who wants to become a nuclear peer. But that's not all. So that's at the strategic level. So intercontinental level, when you take it down a notch and you look at either limited counter infrastructure, deep theater interdiction, or tactical, which sort of is all in theater and limited homeland strikes, various levels of war, various missions of nuclear weapons, you see that there's an entire box in red of missionaries that are not part of this central strategic exchange. Deterrence, I'll just remind us all, it's founded on credible military capabilities across major military missions. All those missions are major military missions. Punishment, and second, resilience against contemplated attacks by the adversary, denial. So let's look at what's in that box, and for shorthand, we'll just call that theater nuclear forces right now. When you look at theater nuclear forces, I guess sort of what was on Admiral Richard's mind when he was talking about the breathtaking pace. He said, "Look, we're going to have 2 peer-capable nuclear competitors. The pace for China is breathtaking, and China can now execute any possible nuclear employment strategy." He was more specific. In my mind, the Chinese are building a military that is capable of coercion. So if you want a military that's capable of coercion, you have to add the theater nuclear forces, particularly if you feel at any in any way potentially inferior on the conventional side. So let's look at this a little further. There's a huge escalatory attraction for non-strategic nuclear weapons or theater nuclear weapons for our great power rivals. And mostly that comes from our dominance in 5th and soon 6th generation aircraft. You can't hit what you can't see. And they have a hard time seeing anything beyond 4th gen. So if you're at 5th gen, if you're at 6th gen, we're staying one step ahead of the IADs, and they need to account for that in their military planning, in their military acquisition. So it just so happens as well that theater nuclear weapons is the sole area of military competition that the U.S. has just ceded to our rivals. Pick any other area, whether it's AI or critical minerals or chip production, hypersonics, space, counter space, you name it, we compete. That is what we do. In some areas we compete incredibly favorably. In some areas we don't compete quite as well. But in all areas we compete. The one area that's been sort of a glaringly obvious hole in that has been theater nuclear weapons, where our rivals have matured their forces over the last 30 years, and we've essentially disbanded our forces in the first 10 and done nothing in the last 20. Very, very little, except become alarmed at people who say we need a theater nuclear force. Sorry, little political. The issue now, though, is the bottom box. We are now outmatched at the theater nuclear escalation level by rivals in both theaters. And on the side, so let me take us over to the side just for a quick moment. These are pictures of satellite photos of Pingtong. That's the nuclear weapons assembly plant. in China. It's in a deep valley up a pretty uninhabited area. Not too far from inhabited area, but it's in a deep valley. The assembly plant in 2002, the new one, it was just a greenfield. 2013, we see construction. They finished that in maybe 15, 16. They started operations soon after that. So maybe for the better part of a decade even, they've been using this facility. Maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 years, they've been using this facility that has a capacity probably of about 100 to 200 warheads per year. Not saying that that's exactly what they're producing, but they have built themselves a production plant, which essentially it would be equivalent to sort of like a PF4 plus Pantex. It's where they do their pit production and their warhead assembly. So just as a note, they are moving out smartly and have moved out. So this is past tense, have moved out smartly to put themselves in a good position for this inflection phase. Just another word about low yield nuclear weapons. A lot of times, folks, if you talk about nuclear weapons with someone, they think cataclysm. Well, not saying nuclear weapons aren't bad. They are cataclysmically destructive, can be. They can also be less cataclysmically destructive. So in this case, this is the port of Beirut. I think everybody remembers that in the summer of 2020, that large explosion in the port of Beirut kind of wiped out a portion of the port, but a lot of the port survived, and essentially all of Beirut survived. And this was roughly a 300-ton blast. That's kind of on the order of what some of these theater nuclear forces can be. China is moving in that direction. As an aside, Russia is already there. They've been working on ultra low and very low yield warheads for the past quarter century. They've been doing that at their test site while we have not. So both rivals are working on this. In this case, I would say Russia is certainly ahead on looking at ultra low and very low yield warheads, but I believe China is right behind. So what does a picture of Chinese escalation philosophy look like in the 2030s? What's driving them? Well, I actually ripped off this picture from the picture of Russian escalation philosophy right now. Escalatory value on the vertical axis, some sort of dimensionless timeline of the conflict on the horizontal axis, and you can see the punctuation early in the conflict. You can see that there's some initial strikes that are designed for terminal de-escalation on terms favorable to China or Russia, either one of the peers. That's what these weapons are great for. I think that's the type of message that the Oreshnik, for example, was meant to send just over a week ago. You can have some follow-on theater strikes that are more widespread, and those are kind of at the operational level to try to take away, in the case of Russia and China, probably to try to take away our ability to keep 5th gen sortie rates high. So probably against air bases in theater. That would be the top priority, along with missile defense. Then you have some continued escalation into theater nuclear warfighting and conus compellence. So the conus compellence piece would be this Russian doctrine of Sadsit. So for China, we haven't seen any similar doctrine evolve yet. Sadsit stands for Strategic Operations to Destroy Critically Important Targets, essentially critical infrastructure attacks. Those attacks can be non-kinetic, kinetic, and within kinetic, they can be conventional or nuclear. And then it goes up to central strategic war. So China wants to be able to manage escalation and produce these favorable off-ramps in a conflict at the time and place of its choosing. That's essentially what it wants to do. I'm going to skip through this in the interest of time. Theater nuclear weapons. Russia's done the calculations. They can be incredibly helpful from a economy of munitions perspective, especially in the case of a Russia, where they can produce warheads, 1,000 warheads a year. They can produce a lot more warheads than they can produce, say, Tomahawk skis. And China is probably not in that position. They are able to produce missiles at a pretty high rate. But they might think through this calculation as well. And certainly the calculation, part of this calculation holds for them. So you have a theater, you have your strategic forces on the right-hand side. That's just a roll-up of what we've already seen. So 1,950 for the U.S., 578 for China. Current 2025-ish numbers. When you add the theater nuclear weapons, though, you see that that's just half the problem. In this case, snapshot today, it's almost exactly half the problem, because you have all of these theater systems, and I won't go through all the systems. They're familiar to probably everyone here. These are almost most of these are ballistic missiles. Some of those are cruise missiles, and there's probably a few gravity weapons that they have modernized in view of the coming H-20 stealth bomber, particularly. Before I go to the next slide, so this is where we are in 2025. That number doesn't look so good now. I mean, they're above half. So it kind of belies this whole Federation of American Scientists play when they cite the United States as having, I don't know, 5,000 and something weapons. Technically, yes, okay, but they're not operationally relevant, let alone operationally in the field deployed. So these are weapons that are ready to go in a crisis and conflict timeline. These are not, theoretical weapons that someone has to dig out of a hole somewhere and refurbish a little bit and then get somewhere else. And no, these are on days, order of days type of timeline, operationally relevant deliverable warheads. And in that category, which is really the category that's most important, China currently sits a little bit above half, my estimate, half of where the United States sits. So it's not, China has only 1/20th of what the United States. No, that's a false narrative, and we should stop believing that. As you look at this decadal nuclear force revolution over the 25 to 35 period, you see that these numbers are going to spike. And these are programs that the Chinese have on the books. So it's not the F-40, 45, 51. That's not a made-up thing. That's an actual program that they are actually working on. So this is kind of my best guess at the program of record, if you will, in China. This program of record requires a lot of fissile material. We'll get to that in a minute. But you can see that, kind of where they're spending a lot of their time. CJ-30s, the H-20 is going to be a nuclear heavy bomber, stealth bomber. And so it's going to have nuclear cruise missiles in all likelihood. Probably have some gravity weapons. The DF-26, a large portion of the theater nuclear force, particularly in the future. As you see, some of these systems will be going away. They kind of have a hodgepodge more of systems. They'll have a thinned out number of systems, but more of those systems in the future. And then they'll have significantly higher numbers of strategic or intercontinental forces, intercontinentally deliverable warheads. So does China have enough plutonium? That's one question that we might want to ask. And the answer really is they probably have enough for where they are right now, but when we did the analysis, we came to the number of 1375, 1,375 warheads worth, so roughly 1,400. If they're a little bit below 1,200 right in 2025, they probably have a little bit of headspace, which is good because their plutonium production reactors and reprocessing plants are coming online very soon. Very soon. I'm not quite sure when they all will start operating. I believe one is already operational, but I'm going to forego that because I haven't looked at that really in a while. We did look at the historical production, and there's some assumptions made by previous analysts that we think are, probably should be relaxed. So we're at a point with China to say, yeah, they got enough plutonium for now. They need to get that plutonium production ramped back up, which again, they're working on, and they're working on it in a timely fashion. They're going to start producing weapons grade plutonium just at the point that they really need it, which also should kind of cause us to connect the dots on the numbers of warheads. What about NC3? Well, their NC3 is changing too. These are large phased array radars, and they have been fitting out their NC3 structure with these radars for a few years now, probably about the last 10 years especially. And this really gives them the ability to launch on warning, a higher alert posture, part of this survivable second strike. Speaking of survivability, you look at the bomber base, for example, Neixiang bomber base. H6Ns are housed here. This is a hollowed out mountain. So they don't fool around when it comes to survivability. They want their bombers, especially in this case, their H6Ns, to be fully survivable. Those adits are very large, can roll bombers in and out easily. And on the inside, there's probably plenty of places you can store those bombers, and they do store those bombers inside. We see that. This is just how serious they take survivability and second strike survivability. Those adits are on the backside of the mountains as well. Very difficult to get at. So deterrence gap, Admiral Richard talked about this. I'm not going to dwell too much on this, except to say we've got to do something. He's talking about a SLCM N capability here, essentially. And so if we go back to the picture of 2035, what could we do? Well, we could upload. So take a look at the right-hand side of the slide first. Those are the so-called strategic forces. We could upload from 1975 to 3125. That's not a bad upload, especially considering that China would be at 2184. The problem is there are some issues with uploading. You can do that upload once. We're going to have to start worrying about tritium after that. So we've got some issues that we have to resolve, and they are serious issues, and they are material issues. So you can upload, though. That's the good news. And remember, this number, the total of 3,600 for China, again, that's for China. So we haven't even touched Russia, which will be at least double that. So you're talking about numbers of warheads in aggravated antagonistic nuclear peers well over 10,000. So if we think we're going to get away with a couple thousand, we probably need to think again and do that math, because I'm sure that our allies who depend on us are going to do that math. We could also, on the left-hand side, as you see, we can add some theater forces. Doesn't have to be one for one. Absolutely no reason it should be one for one. But you have to field a credible force. It has to appear that there is going to be pain in climbing that escalation ladder. And maybe should, ideally, too much pain for it to be worth it. And that would be at about 1,000 theater weapons of various types. Some warheads that I haven't covered: orbital bombardment systems, nuclear-powered, nuclear-armed cruise missiles and torpedoes. We know they're working on some of that. Ultra-low-yield warhead development. We suspect they're working on that. Nuclear-tipped defensive systems. They are nuclear-tipped in Russia. The same system has been imported to China. It's reasonable to believe that maybe they're working on something there. Nuclear-capable artillery or tactical rockets. It would be a little unseemly from an Asian perspective for China not to have forces that little brother North Korea has. Continental range land attack cruise missiles, so similar to, say, KH 101, 102 type long range cruise missiles, and potentially transference of weapons grade plutonium from Russia to China. And Russia has many thousands of warheads worth of material readily available, tens of thousands of warheads worth of material readily available. And so maybe in response for help in the Ukraine conflict, they pay China in plutonium. Would we ever see it? Probably not. Okay. So the commission recommends urgent expansion of the capacity of U.S. nuclear weapons defense. This is from the Strategic Posture Commission, and I'll wind up with this as my as a wrap-up slide. Flexibility to respond to emerging requirements in a timely fashion. That's the underlying phrase, and there are really two large ones, two large requirements. We have to be able to upload a significant fraction of the force, and do that soon. And we're going to have to be able to field a credible theater nuclear force. Some other things we should think about. There's a lot of things we should think about. I'll just leave that up for a second, and we'll move on to Q&A. And I think at this point, I turn it over to Alex. Right, Alex?
Yes, thank you. And also Peter as well. Let me go ahead and
Great.
bring Peter in. I don't see any. Oh, here we go. And to the audience, feel free to shoot your questions to Chris. And
Oh,
Peter,
Peter, I
you're
think
muted.
you're muted.
Peter, you're on mute right now.
Let me try again.
Okay, there
Chris,
you go.
the Posture Commission had close to 100 recommendations. Walk us through those that if you were advising the administration or Congress, what would you say would be the top 4 or 5 that we really should get going on? And my second part of my question is, are the Chinese deterrable? Because my concern is this: if nuclear weapons at the theater level are used by Russia in the Ukraine theater, and they work, they secure however you want to define surrender, but they change the nature of the conflict. Everybody in the world is going to say, holy cow, this stuff, these things work. Because our nuclear deterrent has probably prevented Russia from using their nuclear weapons to date, but Russia's nuclear forces have deterred us from going all in with respect to NATO and helping Ukraine. There are no NATO forces officially in Ukraine or fighting Russian forces. So we have nuclear deterrence working in both cases, but also didn't stop the original conventional fight. Neither did we in 2014, and neither did we in 2008 with respect to Georgia and Moldova. And so the Chinese are looking at this, just as they looked at Desert Storm, just as they looked at Operation Iraqi Freedom. They learned from actual battles, actual fighting. And the problem is we have no history of 2 nuclear armed folks fighting each other with nuclear weapons. This is a roll of the dice, which my hope is enough to say, boy, we don't want to go there from everybody, which is what our nuclear deterrent is designed to do. So start with the Posture Commission. And then the third question, is it not true that Russia has all the fissile material you could possibly want, and they can just simply give it to China or sell it to them? So, sorry, those are three questions, and then I'll turn it over to Alex and let the audience fire away.
Great. Thanks, Peter. I appreciate you starting me out with easy ones. Let me take the easiest one of those three first. On the question of fissile material, yes, Russia has near infinite amount of fissile material. Particularly, I'm thinking of separated weapons grade plutonium. There's obviously the 34 metric tons that was slated for the plutonium reduction agreement that kind of failed. So there's that, and that agreement, since it's not in force and never came into force, that 34 metric tons is available. So that's thousands upon thousands worth right there. They probably have more than that. That wasn't going to be captured under the plutonium agreement. So another 40, 50, 60 metric tons. So for all intents and purposes, it's nearly infinite. So that's the first thing. Regarding the Strategic Posture Commission most important recommendations, there were a lot of recommendations. I would say that the ones that impinge on these two emerging realities, for me, those are the most important recommendations. And there's a bunch of them, so there's probably a lot more than 5. But the ones that have bearing specifically on fielding a credible theater nuclear force, and specifically on successfully being able to upload indefinitely. We're uploading the hedge, and at the nuclear posture review table back in 2017, when I said, well, if we anticipate having to upload the hedge, then we need to build another hedge, because if you have an anticipation of using something, it's no longer a hedge, really. It should be sort of in your contingency planning. When I was shouted down at that table and told, we're not going to hedge the hedge. Well, okay. That's not working out well for us right now, I would say. So we really have to upload that hedge and be able to sustain that upload. And then, of course, we're probably going to want to actually have a real hedge after we upload the hedge that's in being right now. Remember, we're going to be 10, 12, 13,000 cantankerous warheads facing our direction and the direction of our allies that we're going to have to both deter and assure our allies underneath threat of.
Now, let me interject by one thing that's very important. If you get rid of Minuteman, your total warheads that you can deploy is 1,536.
Yeah, right.
That counts bombers at 60. Okay, I understood. But in terms of fast flyers, you could only go up by a couple dozen.
Yep.
And given our shipyard problem, is I can start building more submarines in 2033, one a year, unless I decide, I guess, not to build any attack submarines and build boomers. But the issue then is, if you get rid of ICBMs, I can put a little more than 2 warheads per D5 missile per 16 missiles times 12 Columbia class subs. That's my upload. Now, I can upload more under the D5 with Ohio, but as soon as I upload, I'm going to have to take them down anyway, unless we find some miracle to go beyond the 40 some odd years of life. So I'm writing something on this right now, is that in the absence of Minuteman, you have no upload.
Yeah.
Or in the absence of Sentinel. But even with, I think you're right, we could basically go to 3,000 warheads, plus or minus. So I apologize for that interjection, but we've had a hedge under every single arms control deal we've ever done. We've always said to Congress, no, because if things go bad, we can always build up, and under the SALT treaties, we're going to build up anyway. So the hedge was built into the treaties. So Russia went from, for example, 2,000 warheads in 72 to over 10,000. Mark Schneider, I think Senator Coates said 13,000 during the START one negotiations in the Senate and ratification. He thinks the Russians probably had less than that, but nonetheless, what an enormous buildup under the SALT Treaty, which tells you what a revolution START one was. Because remember, when
Yes.
Reagan proposed reductions back in 76 to remarks to the Committee on the Present Danger, he was ridiculed for being, oh, it was a ruse, it was unrealistic. And it's true. The Russians told Secretary Vance early in the Carter administration, no, niet, to any proposals on reductions, which tells me that the fact that we got START 1 and START 2 and Moscow and New START all done, there are various treaties, and some good, some bad, but nonetheless, we have gone from over 10,000 weapons to somewhere around 2,000, which I think is an extraordinary achievement, but it was not an achievement made because the Russians turned into nice guys. This is not an easy thing, is my point, and I apologize for the soliloquy, but again, go forward again, sir.
No, that's excellent, Peter. I mean, all remarks right on the spot. So I agree. When we look at a hedge, for example, and the upload problem, we need to be honest with ourselves and not double count things, not be content by being able to upload something for a few years. We're going to have to upload, and that will be the new indefinite force. So that upload is not going to come back down. It's not like, oh, we're having a trouble on the C leg, so let's upload for a few years into the ICBM leg or whatever. That's not this kind of upload. This kind of upload is your nuclear peers are looking to bury you, and you need to keep that upload forever for all intents and purposes. So we need to be honest with ourselves, and if that means we need a dedicated reactor for tritium production, well then we build one. There's 2 of them in Russia, and they don't build things just to build things. They build things because they're smart about it. They feel like they need that. Well, we may need that too, and some of these things may cost a lot of money, and hopefully they can get done sooner than some of these other things that we're trying to do, because it seems like everything takes a long time. So yeah, lots of issues there, Peter. I mean, I think, from the perspective of China learning lessons about the deterrence in Ukraine, yes and no. We never passed a Ukraine Relations Act, for example. We have a Taiwan Relations Act, and we have that for a reason. That was the elected representatives of the United States of America saying that we would stand by Taiwan, period. Giving money to a partner, not the same thing. And if I was China, I would think twice before I took any firm lessons from how deterrence either succeeded or failed in the case of Ukraine when it comes to Taiwan. They are not the same. And I think we would do well to underscore the dissimilarity of them to China. That's just my thinking on that. I see some questions in the chat here. One on ICBMs and being closely spaced together. I think part of that is they have an NC3 situation that they've built out and are building out. So they're actively building out an early warning system so that they can reliably catch an attack on the silo fields, 20, 30 minutes before the actual attack hits. So they can launch out from underneath such an attack. So you don't really need huge amounts of spacing. That's, we've said for a long time, that is something that complicates the calculus of a nuclear adversary coming against the United States. If we have a missile field, We have missile fields, and those missiles are on they are on a super high readiness. So once we get a confirmed and highly reliable call that there is a large inbound strike against our missile fields, well, I'm sorry, rival, but you're going to be hitting empty holes at that point. And that's essentially, I think, the message that China's sending with their missile field as well. Receptivity for our my arguments among the new Trump team, as far as we see it now, knowing we don't even know if SecDef can be confirmed. Good question. I haven't been called down to Mar-a-Lago yet. And if I ever was, I couldn't say it anyway. I think that, facetiousness aside, I think that there will be some receptivity because the peril is, I think, obvious, and I think there's no desire to come out on the short or weak end of the stick on this. Now, the big issue will be, I think one of the biggest issues, who's going to be NA1, who's going to be the NNSA administrator, who's going to be Deputy Secretary of Energy, even the Deputy Administrator, NA10, that whole structure of the weapons program, top to bottom, in DOE. That's going to be a big issue, because there's a history there of not telling the bad news until the bad news is, all over the place and you can't hide it anymore. The bad news that OMB and every other sector of the United States government is going to have to hear is we are so far behind that this is going to require a lot more money, not a little bit more money, a lot more money for the next 10 years. I think we kind of were half-heartedly on that path last time. There were things that stood in the way. So if that message actually makes it, then we probably have a good chance. Let's see. Next one, battlefield. Should China seriously consider using theater nuclear weapons on battlefield? Would they really need Russia to do it first? I don't think so. Look, I'm not really, I'm not really in the camp that believes China's going to go in 2 years, and try to take Taiwan by force. That's not what we get paid to do. We get paid to look at capability, and we get paid to plan against adversary capabilities, not against what we think they're going to do with those capabilities. So if we have to plan against those capabilities, I would say we better plan on a China that decides at some point in the conflict, these 5th gen sortie rates are just too high. They've got to go away. And the only way we seem to be able to get them is with nuclear strikes. Could be low yield nuclear strikes, fine, whatever. Low yield nuclear strikes on air bases in the region. Do I think that they would do that? Absolutely. If they are willing to go to war in an amphibious invasion of Taiwan, they will have already made the decision that if things get too hot, they're going to cross the nuclear threshold. Again, my opinion is they're not going to take that decision. But we don't put a lot of dissuasion into the pot if we don't have a credible theater nuclear force. So the recommendation, one of my recommendations to NNSA has been, look, we can't wait for SLICM-N in 2034. You saw the picture in 2035. It's already awful. We can't wait that long. We've got to have a credible theater nuclear force in 2 or 3 years, 4, maybe at the outside. And there are ways we can do that, but we're going to have to make the political commitment to do so. And if we do that, then I think we might stave off that prospective Taiwan invasion even longer. Google Earth. I don't know when they were blurred, but you weren't able to see them when Maxar and Planet Labs and when the commercial imagery came out. If you went to the spot that the commercial imagery was taken from, and you looked at Google Earth for quite a long time, and I think it was years, you could not see that imagery. That doesn't help. The American people need to see what our adversaries are up to, and it doesn't help when. I'm guessing that China, the government of China, pays to have certain pieces of Google blurred. I'm pretty sure that various governments do that. To include this government, I think there's certain places you just can't see. It's just blurred stuff. So, very, very low resolution. Yeah, so it's a business. What can I say? They need to make a profit. So I think I got all of the questions, unless anyone else has one. Alex, do you see any others?
No, and thank you, Chris. We're also at the 11:01 mark.
Yes.
So we in respect for everybody's time, people need to go elsewhere. And Peter, do you have any last words? Yeah, you're muted.
I'm delighted that what you had to say, Chris. It's always real food for thought. But we, as Admiral Richard and General Cotton and others have said, we are behind big time. And despite the fact that we're spending a lot of money, about $50 billion a year on the entire nuclear enterprise, as someone said, we need to get to the speed of relevance. And General Hyten was not wrong when he said that. And the question is, we're not there yet. So I believe this incoming administration will be there. The question is, will the House and the Senate? I speak as a former staffer on the Senate side that I always look at, do I have 51 votes? It kind of gets you down to business. But anyway, I'm delighted. And I would like our president, Jim Petrosky, if Jim, you have any questions to take us out of here, and then we'll be finished.
No, I don't have any questions. I always ask about the same question, and you sort of covered it, Chris, and that is, how do we get there and how do we get out of here? And that's the simple question as you referred to it. But I think that's what we see with the new administration, and people like you that are thinking about this, I think are really helping to form a path forward to get us out of this and hopefully never get us to where we are now. I don't look at it as hopeless, but we certainly need to pay attention to it. You guys like you are doing exactly this. So I greatly appreciate all that you had to say here. And so, no special. Peter sort of stole my question up front. So that was good. Thanks, Peter. I'm glad you replicate me there. But I would like to say thank you while I got the floor here. Just thank you to everyone for joining us. We really like these things being filled with a lot of people to get ideas, etc. Send them to us. If you have ideas or things that we need to cover, and visit us at thinktoturns.com, because a lot more than just Peter Huessy seminars, our podcasts, our GSR. We're doing a lot trying to make this happen, and the more people we get involved, the better it'll be. So thank you, Chris. As always, I greatly appreciate.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah, I agree. Thanks to NIDS. Thank you for inviting me. Thanks to everyone who's on here. Really appreciated the chance to present this.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Everybody have a great Christmas if we don't talk in the meantime, and be safe and pray for America.
Amen.